All right, good afternoon slash morning to everybody. Hope everyone's enjoying their Tuesday as we are now just have 2 days remaining in the NBA regular season. That's going to be the dominating focus of conversation today as we had a big day in the NBA last night. We saw three teams clinch a playoff berth out in the Western Conference, and even more exciting, tomorrow night there's going to be a game that will determine who takes the final playoff spot. So I get right into it and take a look at what exactly did go on last night in the games that had playoff implications for them. And for the Oklahoma City Thunder, after falling behind by 18 early on, they were down 23-5 to start the game. They end up winning 115-93, outscoring the Heat 39-12 in the fourth quarter. Russell Westbrook picking up his 25th triple-double of the year, 23, 18, and 13. Carmelo Anthony and Paul George both have decent nights. Paul George at 27, Carmelo with 11. And the Thunder clinch a playoff berth. They are in it for the third consecutive year. And, this is a team that really, especially in the last three quarters last night, looked very in control. Looked like the team that we've expected to see a lot this year. And I think especially after their performance against Houston this past weekend, the Thunder are gaining confidence. I think they're finally starting to get into that rhythm. I think the acquisition of Corey Brewer is starting to have more and more of a positive impact as time goes on in this season. And I think depending on who their first round matchup will be right now, it's slated to be Golden State as they're in the 7. I think that they'd be perhaps a matchup that the Warriors really wouldn't want to entertain the idea of facing. I mean, that's a team that beat the Warriors twice this year, beat them handily in Golden State, actually. And I think that in a playoff series, especially without Stephen Curry, that's going to be something that would be really a significant challenge for Steve Kerr and the Warriors. As far as the Miami Heat go, they are now in the 7th spot in the East, and Milwaukee has all of a sudden worked their way back up to the 6th. So that'll be interesting to see how those final 3 spots in the East pan out. Cleveland Cavaliers ended up beating the Knicks 123-109, keeping their hope for the 3 seed alive. The Bucks ended up beating the Magic. That's what helped them move up. The Timberwolves won a must-win game against the Grizzlies 113-94, but unfortunately for them, the Denver Nuggets beat the Trailblazers 88-82. So the T-Wolves and the Nuggets happen to be playing each other on Wednesday night, and that's exciting. This is something that I feel like we have every year in the NFL, which is cool, is that there's that Sunday night football game in Week 17 that determines who wins the division. And it's almost like that same kind of deal happening on Wednesday between the T-Wolves and the Nuggets. And I think I've said in a lot of my videos so far that it would really, really be bad if the Timberwolves missed the playoffs this year. I mean, if you take everything into account from really, from the trade that brings in an all-star, somebody like Jimmy Butler, you have Karl Anthony Towns having an incredible season. For most of the year, they look to be solidly in control of not just a playoff spot, but of home court advantage in the first round. And then they lose Jimmy Butler. Things really went down by the wayside. They dealt with some other injuries too. Jeff Teague missed significant time. They haven't gotten what they've needed out of Andrew Wiggins at times. And now they're playing a Denver Nuggets team that is extremely, extremely confident. They just got Gary Harris back last night. Nikola Jokic got a big triple-double in that game, helping the Nuggets win. And, I mean, that's a team that's young, they're confident, they're skilled, and they have a chip on their shoulder. They were in this position last year. They were that 9th team in the Western Conference. They were in control of a spot for a little bit over Portland, and Portland ended up getting it. Now this year, it's a different division rival that they're trying to keep from making the playoffs. And, I think the Nuggets win on Wednesday. I know it's a bold call. But I think all of the external factors are favoring Denver, even though the game is in Minnesota. I feel like with the way Denver's been playing recently, even with Jimmy Butler back in the mix, Taj Gibson got hurt last night, so you don't know what his playing status is going to be. And I think that Denver just has a sense of vengeance at this point. They haven't made the playoffs since 2013, haven't really found any consistent success, and now they have an opportunity to make a big statement on the road to make the playoffs and get their chance at the Houston Rockets. And you know what? I think they do. I think Denver beats Minnesota on Wednesday night. And I think it'd be really unfortunate because Tom Thibodeau did a great job this whole year as far as working with, assembling an entirely new system there and really getting everything to work well, especially the first part of the year with that legitimate big three between Jimmy Butler, Karl Anthony Towns, and Andrew Wiggins. I mean, this is a team that, if they get into the playoffs and Jimmy Butler gets closer and closer to 100%, they believe that they could really do some damage and maybe win a series. But, you can't do that if you don't make the playoffs. And this is a team that's 29-11 at home. The pressure is going to be on them, especially against a Denver team that has performed very poorly on the road this year. Denver's 31-10 at home. And then if you're on the inverse, they're 15-25 on the road. So that just kind of shows you what they've dealt with away from the Pepsi Center this year in Minnesota, with them being dominant at home. I feel like all the pressure's on them, especially because they've been in control of the spot the whole year. So they need to win that game. Minnesota is in desperate need to win that game. I feel like with Denver, if they end up losing, there's still a prevailing sense of optimism in that organization, especially because they dealt with a lot of injuries. I just mentioned Gary Harris, but that wasn't mentioning the amount of time that Paul Millsap missed, and he was their big offseason acquisition. It was going to be the guy that took them to that next level. And then, they missed Nikola Jokic for a good amount of time as well. So they've kept themselves afloat, and I think there is that prevailing sense of optimism that if this team doesn't make the playoffs, that with all the young talent that they have, especially in that backcourt between Murray and Gary Harris, and then, of course, with Nikola Jokic and him being maybe the best passing center in the game, that's a team that really is poised to do some damage in the Western Conference as time moves forward. And then the New Orleans Pelicans, they clinched a playoff spot, beating the LA Clippers, their first visit since 2015. So that's really exciting to see. Very good for Alvin Gentry in that organization. Of course, for Anthony Davis, who is, a top 5 player in the world. And he's finally, getting another shot to go to the playoffs. His first and only visit there. Got swept by the Golden State Warriors, and that was the first iteration of the Steve Kerr teams, and the Pelicans were just simply very overmatched in that series. So the Pelicans are going to get another shot. They're in as a 5 right now. I'm sure they would love to have a battle with Utah, especially because New Orleans plays well on the road. They're 24-17 on the road, so that will be very interesting if that indeed ends up being the matchup. And the Spurs, they're headed back to the playoffs for a 21st straight year. They beat the Kings 98-85. They improved to 33-8 at home, and they outscored the Kings 38-19 in the fourth after really struggling for the majority of that game. So really cool to see. The Spurs, of course, a good story, but I think everybody's kind of accepted that Kawhi Leonard won't be coming back in all likelihood. So that'll, of course, impact the Spurs' chances in the playoffs. Tonight, there aren't too many games that have that big of an impact as far as the NBA playoff race. The Celtics do play the Wizards. That impacts the Wizards' playoff seeding. The Wizards are currently the 8, and I'm sure they'd like to have another shot at the Celtics, especially since they're hurt. So tonight is certainly a game that the Washington Wizards are going to try to win. I'm sure the Celtics, on the other hand, would probably like to avoid playing Washington in the first round and give themselves as good of a chance as they can to advance the second round, even with Washington losing 8 of their last 10. There's still a team that plays Boston very well. And of course, with getting John Wall back and as he gets closer to 100%, they're going to be really tough to play. Philadelphia 76ers are going to look to do what they can to put a stranglehold on that 3 seed. They play the Bucks tomorrow night, and they play the Atlanta Hawks tonight. So that is, of course, a game that the Sixers are trying to win. The Sixers have won now 14 games in a row, and they have a half-game lead over Cleveland for that 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. So they're, of course, looking to lock that in. Honestly, I hope they do, too, for this reason. I actually just purchased a playoff ticket for Game 3 in Indiana, which will be either against Philadelphia or Cleveland. I'd love to see LeBron James in the playoffs, so if Philadelphia can hang on to that 3 seed, that would be pretty cool. That's certainly something I think would be a really cool experience. And I'm sure I've never even seen LeBron James play in general, so that would be really cool. And I think it'd be a great matchup, especially with that being a rematch from last year between those two teams. And while the Pacers got swept, they played 4 close games. So I think it would be really, really interesting to see how a new look Pacers team, how Nate McMillan would address that, especially because they took 3 of 4 from Cleveland in the regular season. Other games tonight that have an impact on the race. The Warriors and the Jazz play each other. Utah, of course, doing what they can to lock in that 4 seed, potentially even a 3. Portland is only a half game up, and they've lost 4 in a row. So they seem to have the 3 seed in check, but that does not actually look to be the case. So Utah looking to pick up a win tonight, and then Portland playing again tomorrow night will look to do what they can to hold on to that 3 spot. And then the Rockets and the Lakers, that game doesn't have any impact whatsoever on the playoffs. And then, of course, Wednesday's games, those are really exciting and interesting as far as the ones that will have an impact. The Knicks play the Cavaliers. As I said, the Sixers play the Bucks. The Wizards are on the road playing the Magic. The Heat host the Raptors. The Nuggets and the Timberwolves, of course, play the Spurs and the Pelicans. While that won't determine who gets a playoff berth, that will certainly play a large role in the seeding of where those two teams end up. The Thunder hosts the Grizzlies. The Jazz will play the Trailblazers. So that is actually another really good game. I didn't even realize that those two teams are playing. That'll be a game for the 3 seed in the Western Conference. And who would have thought that the Utah Jazz would be competing for a 3 seed in the West on the last day of the season? Talk about, I mean, I expected them to be a lottery team. So just, that's what's awesome about the NBA is even when things seem like they are so predetermined and you know what's going to happen, you have things like that where the Jazz and the Trailblazers in the West, they're the two teams battling for the 3 seed. You didn't think that would happen. So that is pretty much all there is as far as what's remaining in the year. Now to the next stage what I want to talk about, which is my picks for the major NBA awards. It's always really fun to take a look at this. I think the NBA awards are really cool. I also like that, granted, every league is like this besides the MLB. But I like, that it takes a look at the entire league and you get to analyze both what players' roles on their teams were, the type of development that they had as players, and the impact that they had across the league and the course of the season in general. So I think that that's really cool with what the NBA awards do. So basically just take a look at what all the major awards are and give you my pick for who I think is going to win them. And I'll actually start off with some of the more minor awards. There's really not too many. I'm just going to go through, I think, the big 5: most improved 6-man, defensive player, rookie of the year, and most valuable player. And I'll start off with rookie of the year, which has been a really contentious debate the entire season. There's a whole lot of debate about this going into the year about who the best rookie would be. Lonzo Ball was the Vegas favorite, I believe. Of course, he's dealt with a lot of injuries. And while he's had a lot of scoring problems, I think he hasn't gotten enough credit for what he's been able to do as far as passing, rebounding, and even defensively. It doesn't always look like he's playing with the utmost effort, but he's certainly somebody that I think will be a great player. But he is not in the Rookie of the Year debate. To me, it boils down between 2 guys. I think Jason Tatum's a somewhat distant third. I want to give Jason Tatum a lot of credit for what he's been able to accomplish this year as far as shooting. I think 42% from 3-point range, which is well above what he shot in college. He shot 34% at a season in Duke, and then at a deeper line, he's absolutely done a great job at shooting from long range. But I also think that a lot of that has to do with him being in the unique position of being this top prospect, a guy that's drafted 3rd overall. And if he was drafted by a different team, will probably be expected to be the guy that turns it all around. But instead, he comes to Boston, even though his role has been bigger than what expected because of all the injuries that they've dealt with, he is still somewhat of a role player. And I think that that's allowed him to perhaps score more efficiently, have things a bit more, I don't want to say have things made more easier for him, but he has a whole lot more talent around him than a lot of the other rookies. For me, Ben Simmons would have to be second. I think he's had an incredible year, and I know I'm beating the dead horse by saying that if this guy had a jump shot, he would really be essentially the second coming of LeBron James because, yeah, I mean, you compare the two outside of the fact that Ben Simmons can't shoot. and they're essentially the same player. Ben Simmons is even a bit taller than LeBron James and a bit slimmer. But other than that, I mean, these are guys that are so insanely effective at getting to the rim. They can post up very effectively. They're good defenders. They're really fast. They're really strong, and they have incredible court vision. And those are all characteristics. I mean, if you're seeing that out of a guy that's a 6'11" point guard, I mean, that's really incredible. And I'm really excited to see what he can do as his career progresses. But to me, it shouldn't be that much of a debate. I think the rookie of the year is Donovan Mitchell. We have not seen a rookie play that kind of role in offensive prominence on his team really since the class of 03, back when you had Dwayne Wade and Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James being the guys that had to instantly be the biggest contributors on their team. And like since then, that hasn't really happened. I feel like a lot of the highly skilled rookies have taken a couple of years to really be at that level, especially to be that good for a team that's in a playoff spot. But Donovan Mitchell will be the first rookie to lead a playoff team in scoring since Carmelo Anthony did so with the 2004 Denver Nuggets. So it's been a long time, and I think that he has just shown an incredible amount of confidence for a rookie. I mean, this is somebody that has had a lot of bad games this year. I mean, games to where he's shot, 3 of 10 from three and 4 of 18 from the field or whatever it may be, but it is not once interrupted his confidence and his ability in shot making and his ability to create his own shot. I mean, this is somebody that has not really been bothered by a lot of the things that young players are typically bothered by. These minor setbacks that have happened in his career so far, and the fact that he's had a bigger responsibility with the injuries that Utah has dealt with this year, and he's responded to it with just such an incredible amount of guys and poise. And I really do think that he's a clear rookie of the year. And I'm really excited to see what this guy can become as time moves on. I mean, he almost has a Kobe Bryant attitude with him when he's on the floor, in the sense that, when the ball is in his hands, he's kind of unpredictable, and that he's confident enough to shoot from anywhere. He's a capable passer. He's somebody that can get to the rim. He's an explosive dunker. I mean, he really is an enigmatic player. And I guess some things that are bad about like just mainstream sports media in general is that he's not a household name. I feel like, a lot of kind of everybody who loosely follows basketball and even sports to an extent knows who Ben Simmons is. They obviously know who Lonzo Ball is, and they probably know who Jason Tatum is too, because it's big markets. It's Philly, it's Boston, it's LA. They're skilled players that are, bringing things up for those franchises, but you don't hear about the kid that's absolutely killing it in Salt Lake City. So I think that kind of sucks, because there needs to be more recognition for somebody that's truly that exciting and can do so much for basketball moving forward, because with what he's been able to do with the Jazz team that was supposed to be a lottery team, I mean, can only imagine what the 21-year-old has in store for him for the future. For the sixth man of the year, I don't think it's too much of a debate. I think there's been a lot of really, really outstanding bench players this year. I got to give it to Lou Williams. It seems like it's tough because he did start for a decent amount of the year and played like a starter, played more minutes than anybody else on his team. But I mean, he put together one of the most impressive seasons from a bench scorer in a really long time. And I still think that at the end of the day, he's going through an ankle injury right now. He only started 19 games out of the 79 he's played in and averaged 22.6 a game, 5.3 assists. His three-point shooting really cooled down as the season went on. He ended up only shooting 35.9% for the year, but still hit 186 threes. And it's just so incredible at getting to the line, and especially being very efficient once he's there at being an 88% free throw shooter. So I think there's been a lot of other really great six men in the league. I think especially if you look at the Rockets, the guy that won it last year, Eric Gordon, certainly deserves some recognition for what he's been able to do in that regard. And I think every team has had some big, especially every big competing team has had really, really important bench pieces, whether that's Fred VanVleet on the Raptors, who's just been such a great story. I think Terry Rozier on the Celtics, even though he's obviously had to start for the latter part of the season definitely deserves some recognition for what he's been able to do in that regard. I think if you look over at the Golden State Warriors, they have a bench that's just always been completely stacked. And while the numbers aren't always gaudy, and while I don't even think he'll be top three, you have to give Andre Iguodala some sort of credit, especially because he was one of the few people that was healthy all year for that team. So that is certainly something to look at. And yeah, I mean, it's always a good debate, but I feel like you look at the teams that are always at the top and doing everything that they can. They have a bench player that's really making that possible. And I think Lou Williams is the man for the award this year. That would be a second win if he's able to come away with the victory there. So that would be pretty cool for him. And I think he was certainly snubbed from the All-Star game as well. So I do believe that he deserves that. Then for Defensive Player of the Year, which is always a really contentious award, one that seemed to be Kawhi Leonard's for years to come. But then, of course, with his only 9 games played this year, that cannot be the case. I thought Andre Drummond was going to be the man for this award at the beginning of the year just because of how good his numbers were in that regard. I think there's other people that you have to put in the conversation like Clint Capella just with what they've been able to do in sense of defensive rating. But of course, Andre Drummond's team didn't make the playoffs, so he didn't defend well enough, I guess, in that regard for looking at a value standpoint. And I think it really comes down to 2 guys this year between Draymond Green and Rudy Gobert. And I probably give Gobert the nod this year. And it seems really tough just because he just hasn't played a lot. He's dealt with multiple injuries. But when he's been on the floor, he has absolutely transformed what the Utah Jazz have been capable of. And I think that Anthony Davis deserves some sort of credit in that regard as well, just because of how great he's been at blocking shots. Rudy Gobert has only played 54 games this year, which makes that tough. But, he's averaged 10.8 rebounds a game, 2.3 blocks a game, and he turned around the season for that Jazz team that looked like they were going to definitively be a lottery team early on in the year. So I think that that's something that you really, really have to look at and consider. And while it's really tough to give that kind of award, to somebody that hasn't played a full season, I do think that it's something that's justified in that case. Then moving on from there, the most improved player, which I think out of those Big 5 awards is probably the toughest to hand out, just because you feel like there's a guy on every team that made significant improvements and changes to their game. And I think especially just looking at the playoff teams, you can name somebody on all, I guess, 17 potential playoff teams is at this point, that made significant improvements. Like you look at the Raptors, you can make a really strong case that Jonas Valanciunas is the league's most improved player. He really expanded his shot this year. He's able to shoot threes now. He's been very effective from the free throw line. And whenever Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan haven't been able to get it done in the starting lineup, he has come through and been able to contribute in that regard. And then you had the Boston Celtics. You could give Jaylen Brown a nod for that. And then you look at the Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, just by virtue of having Joel Embiid play a full season, you could give it to him, or you could even give it to Robert Covington, who's had a great year. And then there's Victor Oladipo, somebody that I probably think is the front runner for the award just because of how drastic his change of setting was. I mean, from being somebody that was a role player and an afterthought on a Thunder team that was really just Russell Westbrook and his crew, he ends up, being traded in what looked to be such a lopsided trade, ends up making the Pacers better than they were with Paul George, which is really insane. So he's probably my pick for most improved player. I'm going to go Victor Oladipo. But, I mean, you look at the Western Conference, and there's a lot of players you can make a case for there as well. I mean, from Dejounte Murray and Kyle Anderson on the Spurs, who both, really helped them stay where they are and made them potentially the most overachieving team in the league. You look at the Utah Jazz, Ricky Rubio making significant improvements to his offensive game this year, Clint Capella for the Rockets. I mean, the list goes on and on, but I think as far as just the biggest difference from what they were doing last year to what they have this year, I think you got to give the nod to Victor Oladipo in that regard. He really has had an incredible season, and he's been a lot of fun to watch. And then MVP, I talked about it a little bit in one of my previous videos, and I'd give it to LeBron James over James Harden. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I already touched on it before, but I think the MVP debate is really subjective because it really comes down to whether you value somebody that's just putting up the most insane numbers regardless of how their team is doing, or somebody that's putting up really good numbers for the best team. And James Harden has done both. And that is what really makes him, I feel like he's going to win the award. And I feel like that's what makes him the clear front runner for so many people. But for me, it's just imagining this specific iteration of the Cavaliers, which has certainly been the weakest since LeBron has come back to Cleveland, and imagining that without LeBron James, especially because he's not, all he has to do is play tomorrow when he plays all 82 games for the first time in his career in his 15th season at the age of 33, and is still having arguably his most impressive season yet. Somebody that's averaging 27.7, 8.7, 9.2, 10.5 field goals made a game, 37.2 minutes a game, which leads the NBA. He scored, nearly 2,250 points this year. Just really incredible. And I think when you just continue to pile on those factors, as impressive as James Harden's season has been, I mean, there have been periods of time where he's been out, and it hasn't made that big of a difference as far as the Rockets' ability to win games. And I think their 64-16 record pretty much tells the story on that they are just incredibly deep with a lot of talent, and that just isn't the case with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And that is why I personally would vote for LeBron James for MVP. And I think that Anthony Davis is probably third on my list as far as somebody that really deserves recognition for keeping his team afloat after just such a devastating injury, losing DeMarcus Cousins after it really looked like they'd finally be able to get over the hump and make it to the playoffs. And then they do. Anthony Davis made that possible. So really, really impressive work by him throughout the season. But I got to give the MVP award to LeBron James this year. So that's all I have for basketball. Just a quick look at what we've had going on in the MLB. Nothing too crazy, but once again, some crazy pitching performances. And we had a lot of them last night between Max Scherzer pitching a complete game shutout over the Atlanta Braves, and Julio Teheran had a good start as well, but the Nationals won 2-0 there. Scherzer struck out 10 with no walks in 9 innings. Then Corey Kluber, 8 innings, 13 strikeouts and a walk, and a 2-0 victory over the Detroit Tigers. That was his first victory of the year. Zach Godley, 7 shutout innings with no walks and 9 strikeouts against the Giants. D-backs won 2-1. Justin Verlander was not having anything from the Minnesota Twins. He went 7 innings of 9 strikeouts and 1 walk, no earned runs. Astros won 2-0. And Jacob Junis carried a no-hitter into the 7th inning against the Seattle Mariners for the Kansas City Royals. Dan Vogelbach would break that up on a single. It didn't matter. The Royals won 10-0. Junis went 7 shutout innings with 2 walks and 3 strikeouts. And another interesting thing that happened across the league yesterday, Clayton Richard, San Diego Padres starter, hit a 3-run homer in Colorado en route to a 7-6 victory over the Rockies. And Clayton Richard, he can kind of swing the bat. I mean, this is somebody that's been around the league quietly for a long time, and he's hit 3 career homers, a 118 career hitter, so nothing great in that regard, but it's always good when you see a pitcher hit a homer. It's the second time that's happened this year. The Rockies struggling a little bit as they lost one at home to San Diego, who was 3-8 to start the year. A lot of good games going on tonight, though. A lot of series starting. The Cubs finally have their home opener. They're hosting the Pirates today. So that game will happen. Rays and the White Sox going on. Will be another game between the Tigers and the Indians. Blue Jays and the Orioles will go at it again. Toronto topped Baltimore yesterday by a score of 7-1. The Reds and the Phillies will have another chapter to their series. Philadelphia edged out Cincinnati 6-5 in last night's matchup. It'll be the Mets and the Marlins again. New York, they're 8-1. Noah Syndergaard's 2-0. The Mets beat the Marlins 4-2 last night. Yankees and the Red Sox play for the first time this year in Boston. That'll be exciting to watch. Angels and the Rangers. Angels coming off an 8-3 victory over them last night. Astros and the Twins with another matchup. Same thing with the Mariners and the Royals. The Brewers beat the Cardinals last night 5-4 in 10 innings. Greg Holland walked 4 in the 10th. That is what allowed Milwaukee to pick up that 1-run victory. They'll have another game at Busch Stadium tonight. Padres and the Rockies with another matchup, the A's and the Dodgers in some interleague fare, and then the D-backs and the Giants with game 2 of their series. So that is what we have coming ahead in the MLB. But other than that, that's all I have for you today. As far as just what we have on the scope for the next week or so, I'll be doing the series preview videos unless some of them become like confirmed tonight as far as what definitely will be a matchup, and I'm not sure if it's possible or not. If that's the case, I'll do whatever I can tomorrow as far as series preview videos. But what I'll probably end up doing is doing 4 on Thursday and then 4 on Friday. I work both days, so I'm not exactly sure. I might have to do like maybe 2 on Thursday, 6 on Friday. I'll even it out some way, but I will be doing series preview videos for all 8 series, taking an analytical look at all of them and then giving you, I guess, my best prediction on who I think is going to end up with the win in them. And then, of course, my looking to start up album reviews on this channel. I may start that this weekend, but like I said, there'll be pre-recorded videos and kind of like retrospective reviews looking at how music has kind of aged and had an impact on the music industry since its release date. And what I'm intending to do with it is, basically take an artist and then review the first album of their discography and then kind of go from there. And I'm not trying to limit what I'll listen to or review by any means. So if you have any suggestions for that, certainly let me know. And then I might do a video just explaining like my musical tastes and stuff like that, and then put it on that section of the channel. And I'll kind of revamp the channel episode of Pick and Pop. This has been Peter Marzano. Thank you for listening.